Matthew 25, beginning at verse 14. For it will be like a man going on a journey, who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also, who had the 2 talents, came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness, in that place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Michael Lewis has written an interesting book entitled Boomerang, Travels in the New Third World. In the book, Lewis describes the financial meltdown of 2008 as it played out in 4 countries, Germany, Ireland, Greece, and Iceland. There have been many books written about the collapse of banks and financial institutions in 2008, most focusing on Wall Street, whereas Boomerang captures the essence of the economic crisis as a sort of travelogue, or as one reviewer called it, financial disaster tourism. Perhaps the most interesting story Michael Lewis tells is what happened in the tiny country of Iceland. Iceland is a country of 300,000 people. For over 1,000 years, the economy was centered around the fishing industry, their one natural resource. Around 2002, something happened. Those same professional fishermen looked at the money being made on Wall Street and decided that they could do it too. Almost overnight, the fishermen left their boats to become bankers. Lewis describes professional fishermen who started working in investment banking only 3 days after leaving the boat and without ever having attended a course in economics or accounting. There was a widespread belief that the Icelandic male didn't need to study business or finance. They were naturally gifted financial wizards. The Icelanders thought of themselves as banking protégés. Even their government officials had a surprising lack of experience in business. At the time, the Minister of Business Affairs was a university graduate majoring in philosophy. The financial minister was a vet, and the central bank governor was a poet. In the short term, the fishermen turned investment bankers did quite well. From 2003 to 2007, the value of the Icelandic stock market multiplied 9 times. In 2006, the average Icelandic family was 3 times as wealthy as the average Icelandic family had been in 2003. And virtually all of this new wealth was tied to the new investment banking industry. As Lewis recounts, it was, of course, an illusion, a web of cronyism in which bankers lent each other vast sums to buy stuff: Beverly Hills condos, private jets, Elton John singing at your birthday party, all at insanely inflated prices. It was all among friends because, as Lewis writes, Iceland is less a nation than one big extended family. Then, of course, the bubble burst. The currency collapsed and the banks imploded, collectively leaving each Icelander on the hook for some $330,000 in banking losses. In the wake of the 2008 financial meltdown, the Prime Minister of Iceland has encouraged his countrymen that it is now, once again, time to go back fishing. Here is another story about investment banking from the Gospel of Matthew. Once upon a time, a man was going on a long journey. He called 3 of his servants and trusted them with some of his money. To the one he gave 5 talents, to the other 2, to the third 1. The master wants his money to work for him while he is away. He's expecting a return on his investment when he gets back. The one with 5 talents puts the money in some kind of aggressive growth plan and soon doubled his investment. The one with 2 talents did the same kind of thing, but the one who received the 1 talent went off and buried his talent in the ground to make sure that it was safe and secure. When the master came back, he was pleased to see that the first 2 servants had made good investments and doubled his money. The third servant was condemned harshly by the master for not even putting the money in a savings account to draw interest from the bank. Even the 1 talent that he had was taken away from him. Jesus is talking about talents, which is a transliteration from the Greek word talenta. In this case, a talent is not the ability to sing or paint. It is not a special ability. What Jesus was talking about when he spoke of talent was a large sum of money. A talent was a coin that was the largest denomination in the currency at the time. If you gave a talent to someone, it would be like winning a lottery. It was a huge sum of money. So that staggering amount of money would boggle the mind of a first-century servant. Jesus himself had probably never seen that amount of money. And so what Jesus is doing here is using outlandish hyperbole to emphasize the incredible value of the gospel. So then the point is that to us, the church, God has entrusted this priceless gospel, this treasure, this gospel whose value boggles the mind, whose value is beyond measure. And the third servant, the recipient of the 1 talent, was, of course, doing the most sensible thing he knew how to do when given such a precious gift, a large amount of money that didn't belong to him. He buried it in the ground. In Jesus' day, burying money was considered wise and prudent. The servant, I am sure, expected to be commended when the man returned and he was able to give him back everything that he had been given, that he'd kept it safe. But instead, he was condemned. And this is what I think Jesus is saying in this parable. A gift of inestimable value has been unloaded upon an unsuspecting church that has not the foggiest idea how to handle it. And maybe our response to Jesus' story is not to be smarter in how we invest our money. Maybe the proper response to Jesus' story is to honestly admit that when it comes to knowing what to do or handling this great gift of the gospel, we are all in way over our heads. It is too much for us to manage. Let's be honest in our inability to handle it. Maybe we, like those Icelandic fishermen turned bankers, should stop kidding ourselves that we know what we're doing in the church, that we have it all under control, that we have a committee somewhere that will figure it out. Maybe what God needs is a group of people who get together and shake their heads and say, we don't know. This treasure is too big, too heavy, too much. And maybe that is when, maybe it is in those times that we dare to attempt something risky and big for God. When we are confronted by the fact that this gospel is much bigger than our attempts to manage it, way bigger than our attempts to be responsible with it. God gives us the gospel not so that our tremendous abilities can be put to good use. God gives us the gospel so that even in our inability, God's great purposes may be carried out. When the gospel is received by people who are under no illusion that they can handle it, perhaps that is when it is possible that something great might happen. Whereas when we think we can handle it, that is when we tend to bury it. When we are overwhelmed by its bigness and don't know how to handle it, and we realize that it is not ours, and we can't be responsible for it, that is when we might get risky and daring. The third servant who buried his talent thought he had it under control. But is that how we want to live our lives of faith? In a way, it's hard not to have empathy, or if not sympathy, for the third servant. He wants what we all want, a quiet, safe investment with a regular return. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, we say. Better safe than sorry. And besides, it wasn't his money. He could have lost it all. It is hard not to see in the third servant a reflection of the mainline church today. Go to any seminar on the church today and you will hear the same thing. We are in decline in almost every way that you can imagine. Fewer people in the pews, shrinking budgets, and in some cases our buildings are literally crumbling around our feet. In such a context, like the third servant, we are full of anxiety for the future. And instead of seeing this as an occasion for trying creative new ways of being the church, we have nothing to lose. We hold on tightly to the remnants of the good old days. Our buildings, our ways of doing things. I mean, who knows? Maybe we will wake up and it will be 1955 all over again. And yet, the gospel calls us to live with a kind of holy recklessness. When was the last time you did something a little crazy for God? A little daring or adventurous? Jesus said, for those who want to save their life will lose it. and those who lose their life for my sake will find it again. Once upon a time there was a young captain assigned to an old ship. The day that the captain arrived, he could tell that the ship needed a lot of work and that the morale of the crew was pretty low. The ship had not left the port in quite some time. The hull of the ship was rotting, the sails were torn and old. Some of the crew members had jumped ship, looking for another ship upon which to serve, a ship that was actually going somewhere. The very next day the captain called the crew together. He ordered the ship to be dry docked, and over the next few weeks the hull was repaired and new sails were hoisted up. The old ship was coming to life again. And then the day came when the captain called the crew together. And the captain said, "It's time we made plans now to leave the harbor." The crew looked around anxiously at one another. The captain, recognizing that some of them would be fearful, said, "This ship was not made for the safety of the harbor. It was made for the horizon." And he pointed out where the sea meets the sky. "But you are the crew," he said. "You will have to decide. Will it be the harbor or the horizon?" For what seemed like an eternity, there was a silence, and the sound of the wind and the waves was all that anyone could hear. And then one crew member in a hushed voice said, "Horizon." And then another said, "Horizon." And then another voice and another, until the wind and the waves were drowned out by the shouts of horizon. On the day of their first voyage, the captain gathered the crew together on the bow and asked them to bow their heads as he led them in a prayer of blessing before setting out. He prayed, "O Lord of the land and the sea, what a joyous day this is, a day most of us wondered it would ever come. But you have given us this ship and this crew. You have given us new life and new hope, and we praise you. But Lord, you know we are fearful, for we have not set sail for the horizon in a long time. We fear what awaits us out there. We know there will be high winds and waves and storms, but we also know that you created us for the horizon, not the harbor. And best of all, you will be our captain, guiding and protecting us. And so, our captain, we have heard your call to set sail, not knowing all that is ahead of us, but knowing what we need to know, that you have called us and you are with us. Amen." The ship sailed out of the harbor that day, never to return to rest again. The people on the shore heard all kinds of stories about the ship, how it had sailed the 7 seas and came through storms and discovered new lands, all because the crew understood that ships were not made for the harbor, that they were meant to let the wind fill their sails and take them only God knows where. And all the stories they told about what happened next.